over recording, so this will be faster. This is the landscape. As you can see, it is slow, so it does take me a while to build it up, but I did this in like 30 minutes, so you got to forgive me. Most of the time you build a landscape, it takes like 2 hours, 3 hours maybe. You have 9 texture sets. Use the tab to hide the texture key. That brings the mouse up as well. The mouse itself on the landscape is 3D targeted for like a 3D object with a 3D vector in there. That's how it knows where to go, with a 0 vector on the 2. So, but that mouse is also being drawn onto the drawing. When you press escape, the mouse disappears. That saves the project. That keeps the mouse from being saved. If you press the X button, you can undo any mistakes that you make. And in here, I'm drawing up the landscape again. Couple of things. You can sculpt while you draw, which you can't do with other landscapes. So in my landscape particularly, you can draw 3 times. That means that you're drawing the first RGB, then the second RGB, and then that targets where the textures go. You'll find out what I mean by where the textures go at the end of the video, where it's got texture 1 through 9. There's also a 10th texture set called black. Black can be a texture set, so wherever you see black, it could also be a texture. So that means that it comes with a total of 10. If I wanted to change it up, I could. I just have to add another viewport, and then you'd have 18 texture sets. Now, if you're asking, are all these viewports going to be running during the game? The answer is no. Only need 1 viewport to run during the game. That single viewport will do all the math during the game. So, like if the player wants to sculpt the landscape with like a bulldozer or whatever, they can do that. So it's basically 3 splat maps on top of each other. How it's being saved? It's being saved with image files, so the landscape runs off of an image file, PNG file or whatever. And then there's a whole bunch of CGF mathematics going into it. I'm going to skip ahead in the video. Right now it says 5:10, so I'm just going to skip ahead. I'm making progress with the sculpting and the painting, etc. in here. But there's other stuff I wanted to talk about. So after the landscape is pretty much finished, there's the island, etc. And I think I've saved this landscape about 5 to 6 times, so that's not too terrible. Especially for one that runs in the process method, which was the whole point. And then I go out to paint the rest of it. So that's the end of that video. The second video is right here. There are other options with this landscape, believe it or not. It doesn't seem like it, but there are other options. So what can we do with those other options? Let me go ahead and speed up the video. The other options is we can take a texture, any type of texture, and throw it into the landscape. Throw any texture on top of the textures that are already there, and you create an island just like you would with Map Magic or whatever other landscape mod are you using. Map Magic's still an editor landscape. Mine's a process method landscape. Mine's also procedural. So at this point I'm actually going to go ahead and make the texture. This is 256 texture-wise, a 2K texture landscape. 3 2K textures are running the landscape, so that's what I'm utilizing as a 256 because that's a portion of the landscape, but you could do a 512, etc. that changed the island size. I just simply painted a dot. After I paint a dot, I add an image texture. I'm going to need an image texture anyway, so I also added a noise texture, multiply, the whole shebang with the noise texture to give it some roughness, etc., make it look a little different. Then I obviously multiply, then take the spec and roughness off so I can clearly see the image. Then I add a color ramp because I forgot how to multiply with a regular color. I could have just put a multiply in there and multiplied with a regular color, but whatever. I was doing this pretty quickly. I added another image. I called it Island. Then I went ahead and baked that. Pretty sure you know how to do that. After I baked that, I went ahead and saved that into the project folders. Closed that, saved that, closed that, opened it up again. Found the image that I made, threw it into Godot, and threw that into the second control box. The second control box is, in fact, the sculpt one. And wherever the position is, it's already set up. You don't have to change the position all the way to the left. Wherever the position is the position in the sub viewport. Okay, and so I did like 500, 500. Now you might see the texture overlapping other things. This is where pushing alphas would be important. So that's the little island that I made. It's tiny, it's not really a big deal, but what's important to note is I could actually code this island to move, which is something that you wanted. You wanted an island to move in the game. Well, you can have multiple landscapes with multiple islands, and all the islands can move. You could also make the big center islands move as well, but you don't have to do that. But that also fixes sculpts, but it can also do another thing. It can paint too. So you could take the same texture, multiply it by like red or any other color, and you can get that texture set for that texture in those, as long as those bodies are copying each other. Last but not least, CGF files. So I'll just go ahead and skip ahead to explain that. CGF files or CFG files are right here. They save colors, and it is something that I recently learned without the internet. I couldn't use the internet, had to find this thing called config file. And then I abused the fuck out of that because it saves all kinds of shit that's really important. It saves vectors now. I made it save vectors. It doesn't normally do that. It actually just saves other stuff. So we got saving involved in the landscape involved with the stuff. So saving, always going to be a thing from now on. All kinds of other options, always going to be a thing from now on. Also, have this thing called a water plane. Wherever the grid is, if you notice on this last video I'm making, wherever the grid is, you can see that's where the water would be, and that's actually where the water plane is. Now, the water plane is not water at this point. It's not water, it's just to mimic a water plane. The function of this landscape is to paint it, sculpt it, do whatever the fuck you want with it, then erase it. Why do you erase it? Well, because you're going to export that to another landscape that you're making. So it saves it as a resource that's going to save a shit ton of memory. That's the whole point. It's going to be saved with a second viewport. Second viewport's going to do the sculpting for you. The sculpting viewport, which is necessary, which is what the player's going to be utilizing in order to sculpt the landscape, the one that's already made. There. So this landscape is a process landscape that makes a process landscape that saves a fuck ton of memory, which is necessary for a game to work. How much memory are we using at this point? A gig. A gig of memory. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. So it's not practical to make it an application. It might be in the future, but it's not practical at the moment to make an app. Nevertheless, it does what it needs to do. It does the thing. It's a landscape, it moves, it does all the cool stuff you wanted it to do, and it'll work with water too. It'll make water patterns and stuff like that too. That means there's an infinite amount of textures you could have and an infinite amount of colors. This set is 9, but the next set could be a different set of 9. They also stack on top of each other, and they also can copy paints. Because it's a viewport, you could stack the landscape viewports and make a super landscape that stacks that with 9 times 3, which is 27. Not necessary, but you could do that. Other landscapes can't do that. My landscape can. And that's pretty much it. That's all that I have to say about this stuff.